"We are alone. Let's do what is necessary," whispered the Apache woman mockingly. The sun was beginning its slow descent over the wide, rugged canyon, painting the rocks in shades of gold and red. The wind whispered through the narrow passages, carrying the dry, dusty scent of the desert. A small group of settlers moved cautiously along a winding path, their horses' hooves kicking up tiny clouds of sand with every careful step. They were far from any town, far from safety, and every shadow seemed to hide unknown danger. Among them was Thomas, a man in his late 30s, tall and wiry, with a face hardened by years of travel. Beside him rode his younger brother, Samuel, who had a nervous energy about him that made him constantly glance around at the cliffs and the desert floor below. There were others in the group too. Mary, a brave woman who had traveled with her husband to start a new life, and Peter, an older man who had seen many winters but still carried the cautious wisdom of experience. Together they formed a small caravan of hope and determination, yet there was an unspoken tension among them. They all felt it, something watching. It began as a fleeting shadow, flickering between two rocks. At first, Thomas thought it was just the play of light and shade, a trick of the sun on the canyon walls. But as they moved forward, he noticed it again, a figure moving silently, blending into the land. He squinted, trying to make out details. The figure was small, but its movements were deliberate and confident. It seemed to be studying them, waiting. "Did anyone else see that?" Thomas asked, his voice low but firm. Samuel swallowed hard and nodded. I think I saw something. Over there near that ledge." He pointed to a jagged outcrop where the rocks jutted sharply into the sky. Mary leaned closer to Peter. "Could it be a traveler like us?" she whispered. "Or maybe a scout from one of the towns?" Quiet like the wind itself. Her long, dark hair was tied simply, and her clothing was practical, made for movement rather than style. She was slender but strong, her eyes sharp and alert, glinting with an intensity that made Thomas and the others instinctively pause. There was a calm confidence in the way she held herself, as though she owned every inch of the land around her. For a long moment, neither side spoke. The wind carried only the sound of horses' hooves and the faint rustle of distant birds. Then slowly she spoke, her voice low, almost a whisper, yet clear enough to reach them. "We are alone, let's do what is necessary." There was something mocking in her tone, as if she knew their thoughts, their doubts, and was testing them in the simplest yet most terrifying way. Thomas gripped the reins tighter. Who are you?" he called, his voice trembling slightly. The woman did not answer immediately. She tilted her head, studying them carefully. Her eyes flicked over each face in the group, and for a moment they felt the weight of those eyes, like she could see into their hearts, their weaknesses, their courage, and even their fears. Finally she spoke, almost teasingly. "I am someone who walks where the land takes me. You are far from where you belong." "We are just passing through," he said, "passing through." The woman's voice carried a subtle, ironic laugh. "The land does not forgive carelessness. The desert takes what it must, and it has eyes everywhere." Yet seeing her now, standing tall and unafraid, was unlike anything she had imagined. She felt a strange mixture of fear and awe. Peter, ever cautious, leaned slightly forward and spoke in a calm voice. "We don't want trouble. We only seek safe passage through your land." "Safe passage, perhaps, but the land will decide. Not I. You are alone here, alone with your choices, alone with what you can do when there is no one to save you." The canyon, already vast and unforgiving, seemed to grow even more immense, pressing against them with silent threats of cliffs, hidden drops, and the endless desert beyond. Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine. He glanced at his brother. Samuel's hands were white from gripping the reins so tightly. Mary's eyes were wide, reflecting both fear and determination. Even Peter, who had faced many dangers, looked tense, alert to every sound, every shadow. The woman moved then, but not towards them. Instead, she began walking along the ridge, her movements smooth and deliberate, almost as if she was part of the landscape itself. Her eyes never left them. She was guiding them in a way, testing them, showing that she controlled the space around them even without stepping onto their path. Thomas spoke again, quieter this time. "We have food and water. We have horses. We can manage. We can survive if we stick together." Survival is not always about what you carry. It is about what you do when the land does not answer, when there is no one to follow, when every choice is yours alone. One wrong step and the canyon could take their lives without hesitation. The woman's eyes softened just a fraction, though her tone remained firm. "I will watch. You may pass if you are clever, careful, and willing to learn, but I will not intervene unless the land itself demands it. The canyon has rules. Respect them or pay the price." He felt the responsibility not just for himself, but for the group. He looked to Samuel, whose face mirrored his own apprehension. "We need to stay alert," he whispered. "Every step matters. We can't afford mistakes." Peter, usually silent, finally spoke. "She is not an enemy, not entirely, but she is a force of the land itself. We must respect that. Watch carefully, learn quietly, and move wisely. That is the only way forward." Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she turned and disappeared along the path behind a rock outcrop, leaving them alone but deeply aware that they were under observation. The group exhaled collectively, though the tension did not ease. The canyon seemed quieter, yet more imposing. Every sound, the creak of a saddle, the shifting of hooves on sand, the rustle of distant birds, reminded them of their vulnerability. Thomas led the group forward, their steps slower, more careful, each movement deliberate. They passed narrow ledges and jagged rocks, remembering the woman's words with every cautious step. They were truly alone now, yet the memory of her voice and her piercing gaze guided them like an invisible hand, reminding them that the wilderness was not to be underestimated. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the canyon floor, they set up a small camp. The horses were tethered, fires lit with care, and the group huddled close, sharing food in silence. None spoke much, each lost in thought. The encounter had left its mark. The fear lingered, but so did a strange admiration, a sense of awe at the woman who had appeared like a shadow, strong and unyielding, a guardian and a teacher of the land's hidden rules. Through that first night, the settlers understood one thing clearly. The world outside their towns and homes was vast, unpredictable, and demanding. And in that vastness, they were utterly alone. Every choice, every movement, every action would determine whether they survived or became another story the canyon would quietly claim. And somewhere, just beyond the ridge, the Apache woman watched. Not as a friend, not as an enemy, but as a living part of the land itself, reminding them of the harsh truth. To survive, they must do what is necessary. The morning sun rose slowly over the canyon, spilling warm light across the rocky walls and the winding paths below. The settlers woke to a world that was still quiet, but the memory of the Apache woman lingered in their minds. Her words echoed through their thoughts. "We are alone. Let's do what is necessary." They were alone indeed, and the day ahead would test them more than they could imagine. Thomas led the group cautiously down a narrow trail that twisted around cliffs and boulders. Each step had to be careful. One misstep could send a horse tumbling over the edge. The air was thin and dry, carrying the scent of the desert and the faint smell of distant sagebrush. The land seemed endless, harsh, and unforgiving. Samuel followed closely behind his brother, his eyes wide and alert. His hands shook slightly as he held the reins, trying not to show the fear that tightened his chest. He had never been this far from civilization before, and the realization that help was nowhere nearby weighed heavily on him. Mary rode beside Thomas, her face set in determination. She had always been strong, but this wilderness demanded more than strength. It demanded focus, awareness, and calm in the face of danger. Every glance at the cliffs, the shadows, and the open stretches of desert reminded her that survival was not guaranteed. Peter brought up the rear, his eyes scanning the canyon as if the land itself might hide threats. He had traveled many miles and faced many dangers, but the presence of the Apache woman the night before had unsettled him. Her confidence, her knowledge, and her mysterious authority had left an impression. He understood now that the wilderness had its own rules and she was a master of them. Hours passed, and the settlers moved slowly but steadily. Water was scarce, and the sun's heat pressed down upon them relentlessly. They stopped occasionally to let the horses drink from shallow pools or small streams that trickled through the canyon. At one point, Samuel nearly lost his balance as his horse slipped on loose rocks, and Thomas grabbed his arm just in time. "You have to pay attention," Thomas warned, his voice steady but tense. "Every step counts here. One wrong move, and we could all be in serious trouble. We just have to stay calm and work together." She did not reveal herself, but her presence was felt constantly, like a silent guide or a shadow that followed their every move. During one stop to rest, Peter spoke quietly, as if not wanting to disturb the tense atmosphere. "She's testing us," he said. "She wants to see what we're capable of, not by helping us directly, but by letting us face the land on our own. That's how survival works out here. You have to learn to rely on yourself, not others." The wind carried whispers that sounded like distant voices, and the shadows played tricks on their eyes. Every step was careful, every glance cautious. The desert was beautiful in a harsh, unyielding way, but it demanded respect. As the afternoon approached, they came to a small clearing surrounded by high rocks. Here, the landscape offered a brief sense of safety, and the settlers stopped to rest and eat. They shared what little food they had brought, each bite a reminder that their supplies were limited and every decision mattered. It was here, in the quiet of the canyon, that they first saw her again. The Apache woman appeared on a ridge above the clearing, moving silently over the rocks. Her eyes were fixed on them, observing not just their movements but their reactions, their expressions, and the way they worked together. She did not speak, but her presence was a lesson in itself. Thomas watched her carefully, feeling a mixture of fear and admiration. "She knows the land better than we ever could," he said softly, "and she's testing us. She's teaching us how to survive, even if we don't realize it yet." They crossed rocky slopes where the loose stones threatened to slide under their horses' hooves, and narrow paths that clung to the cliffs like threads. Each challenge forced them to pay attention to the smallest details. The way the ground shifted, the way the wind changed, the way the sun cast shadows that hid dips and holes. At one point, Samuel slipped while trying to adjust his pack, and Thomas reached out instinctively, saving him from falling. The incident reminded them all how quickly danger could strike, and how important it was to stay focused and work together. As evening approached, the group found a small alcove where they could set up camp. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the canyon floor, and the air was cooling rapidly. They tended to their horses, gathered firewood, and prepared a modest meal. The silence between them was heavy but thoughtful, each lost in reflection on the day's challenges. Peter broke the silence. "We've learned more today than we ever could in a town," he said. "Not from books, not from experience in familiar places, but from this land itself. And from her. She doesn't teach by words alone. She teaches by presence, by example, by showing us what the desert requires of us. That's what she's trying to show us." The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional rustle of an animal or the distant cry of a bird. Somewhere far above, the Apache woman's presence lingered, unseen but unmistakable. She was the shadow in the corner of their eyes, the quiet judge of their courage and attention. Sleep came fitfully to the settlers. Each one dreamed of cliffs, shadows, and the mysterious figure who had entered their path. Yet even in sleep, there was a growing sense of confidence, a recognition that they were learning skills they had never known they possessed. They were becoming aware of the land, of its dangers and its beauty, and of their own strength in navigating it. The next morning the group awoke early, the sun rising over the canyon once again. They felt a renewed determination, a sense that each day would bring challenges but also lessons. They moved together, alert to every sound and movement, careful with every step. The Apache woman's influence guided them subtly, through the awareness she had instilled in them rather than through direct action. As the day wore on, they encountered more obstacles: a narrow ledge along a steep cliff, a small stream that had to be crossed carefully, and patches of loose rock that tested the horses' balance. Each obstacle was met with caution, planning, and teamwork. They spoke quietly, pointing out dangers, encouraging one another, and moving deliberately. By midday, they reached a small plateau with a clear view of the canyon below. The landscape stretched endlessly, revealing the vastness of the desert and the isolation of their journey. It was here that they finally realized the depth of the lesson they were being given. Survival was not just about food, water, or shelter. It was about awareness, focus, courage, and the ability to act decisively when necessary. Thomas looked at his companions, a quiet pride growing in him. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, and they had endured. Samuel's hands were steadier now, Mary's eyes were sharper, and Peter's calm wisdom guided them with steady reassurance. And all the while the Apache woman watched, a silent presence on the ridge above. Her lesson was clear. The land demands respect, the wilderness requires awareness, and true survival comes not from luck, but from courage, intelligence, and unity. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the canyon once more, the settlers made camp again. They prepared their meal, tended their horses, and reflected quietly on the day. They had learned much, but they knew that the journey was far from over. The wilderness would continue to test them, and the Apache woman's watchful eyes would remain a reminder of the skills and strength they must continue to cultivate. The night fell, quiet and deep, and the settlers slept under the stars, alert yet calm. They had survived another day, but more importantly, they had begun to understand what it meant to live fully aware in a world that demanded courage and intelligence. The lessons of the desert, guided by the mysterious woman, were becoming part of them, shaping them into people who could face the harshest challenges and emerge stronger, wiser, and more capable. The sun rose over the canyon, spilling a soft, golden light that made the rocks glow like fire. The settlers woke with a quiet tension in the air. Yesterday's lessons were still fresh in their minds. The desert was no longer just a backdrop. It was a living teacher, one that demanded respect and constant attention. Each one of them felt it. Thomas led the group cautiously along a narrow path that ran along the edge of a steep cliff. The wind blew softly, carrying the dry scent of sand and distant vegetation. Every step was careful, every glance intentional. The cliffs and ridges around them seemed more alive than ever, full of hidden threats and surprises. Samuel's hands gripped the reins tightly. He had grown more confident since their encounter with the Apache woman, but he still felt the sharp edge of fear each time the ground shifted under his horse's hooves. Mary rode close, her eyes scanning the landscape, noticing every movement, every shadow, every subtle change in the wind. Peter brought up the rear, silent but alert, observing both the land and the group. "She's testing us," he whispered, mostly to himself. "Every challenge, every obstacle is part of the lesson. We're learning how to survive, how to think, how to act when there's no one to guide us." Each obstacle reminded them of the Apache woman's words, "We are alone, let's do what is necessary." Survival was no longer a matter of reaching the next town. It was about awareness, judgment, and courage. Around midday, they reached a small plateau with a clear view of the land ahead. Thomas dismounted, scanning the horizon with a keen eye. "We need to plan carefully," he said. "The path splits ahead. One route looks shorter but is steeper and riskier. The other is longer but seems safer. The longer route is safer, and it gives us more room to observe the land and ourselves. I think we should take the longer path. Let's move carefully, step by step." Small footprints in the dust, broken twigs, and the faint sound of movement reminded them that the desert had watchers. It was the Apache woman again, though she never approached. Her presence was always just beyond their vision, guiding and testing them silently. By afternoon, the path narrowed to a thin ledge along the edge of a cliff. Below, the canyon dropped steeply, a dizzying fall that made every step dangerous. Thomas led carefully, instructing the others to watch the footing and the movement of their horses. Samuel's hands were steady now, his fear tempered by focus. Mary's confidence had grown too, her eyes sharp and her movements deliberate. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the canyon, a shout from below. The settlers froze. Looking down, they saw a group of strangers approaching, armed and determined. These were not travelers like themselves. They were hostile, with a clear intention to dominate anyone in their path. Thomas's heart pounded. "We can't fight them," he whispered. "We're too few and the canyon favors them if we panic. We need a plan." "We can use the terrain to our advantage," she suggested. "The ledge is narrow. Only a few can come at us at once. We can hold them off long enough to escape." The strangers below began to climb, unaware of how prepared the settlers were. The narrow path forced the attackers to advance slowly, one by one, giving Thomas, Mary, Samuel, and Peter a critical advantage. Thomas whispered instructions to the group, guiding them with steady authority. They used rocks and sticks to create obstacles, slowing the attackers and making the climb more dangerous for them. The settlers were careful, precise, avoiding unnecessary confrontation, focusing on survival rather than conflict. The Apache woman appeared briefly on a distant ridge, her figure small but unmistakable. She watched without intervening, allowing the settlers to face the challenge on their own. Her presence was both a warning and a reassurance. She had given them the tools. Now it was up to them to apply them. As the day turned to evening, the attackers, frustrated and slowed by the obstacles, began to retreat. The settlers, exhausted but victorious, realized the depth of their learning. They had faced danger, applied what they had learned, and survived. The desert had tested them and they had risen to the challenge. Thomas looked at the others, a mixture of relief and pride in his eyes. "We did it," he said quietly. "Not because we're stronger than them, but because we were smarter. We stayed aware, stayed calm, and used the land to our advantage. Not the kind of courage that rushes blindly into danger, but the kind that sees the danger, understands it, and acts wisely. That's what survival truly is." They had learned that survival required more than courage. It required thought, planning, awareness, and respect for the land and its invisible guides. The Apache woman remained unseen, a shadow in their minds, a reminder that the land always had eyes and lessons for those willing to learn. Her mocking words from that first night now felt less like a threat and more like a challenge they were beginning to meet with skill and awareness. The settlers slept under the stars, alert yet confident. They had faced real danger for the first time and they had survived. More importantly, they had learned the power of careful observation, planning, and courage applied with wisdom. Each one of them felt the change within themselves. They were no longer just travelers through the desert. They were becoming part of the land, attuned to its rhythms, its challenges, and its lessons. Morning came again, bringing light and warmth. The group prepared to move on, stronger and more aware than before. They knew that the challenges of the canyon were far from over, but they also knew that they had gained something invaluable: the ability to act wisely, to respect the land, and to survive through knowledge and courage rather than sheer luck. The Apache woman watched from a distance, her presence unseen but undeniable. She had given them the lessons they needed, allowed them to face danger, and guided them without ever touching a hand. Her teachings were subtle yet profound. She had shown them that survival was about more than strength. It was about intelligence, courage, patience, and the ability to act when necessary. As the group moved forward, their spirits lifted. The canyon was still vast, harsh, and demanding, but they were ready. Each step was taken with care, each decision weighed, each movement deliberate. They had faced their first moral dilemma and real danger, and they had learned from it. They had learned that the desert, the land, and even a shadowy guide could teach lessons that no town, no book, and no ordinary experience ever could. The day ended with the settlers feeling a deep sense of growth. They had survived the desert's challenge, faced danger with wisdom, and gained confidence in themselves and in each other. The canyon had tested them and they had passed, but they knew that the journey was far from over. The land still had more lessons to offer, and the shadow of the Apache woman would continue to guide, test, and teach them in ways they could only begin to understand. The canyon seemed to stretch endlessly before the settlers, a maze of cliffs, ridges, and narrow passages. Each day the sun rose and fell over the desert, painting the rocks in golden and red hues, yet the landscape remained as demanding as ever. The settlers had moved cautiously for days, each step deliberate, each decision weighed. They were no longer simply travelers. They were students of the land, learning its lessons with every choice they made. Thomas led the group with quiet confidence now. The memory of danger from the previous day lingered in their minds, but it had not broken their spirit. Instead, it had sharpened it. He noticed the subtle changes in his companions. Samuel's nervous energy had settled into careful focus. Mary's alertness and confidence had grown with each passing day. Even Peter, whose calm wisdom had always been steady, seemed more alive, his awareness of the land now matching his knowledge of people. The Apache woman remained a silent presence in their thoughts, though she was not always visible. Sometimes a shadow would appear on a distant ridge, or a faint movement in the rocks would catch their eyes, but mostly she was unseen. Her guidance was indirect, felt rather than observed, teaching them without speaking, shaping them through awareness, caution, and subtle observation. As the group approached a narrow canyon that cut deep into the rock, Thomas signaled a stop. The path ahead was tricky, with jagged rocks and steep slopes that demanded careful navigation. "We need to move slowly here," he said. "The canyon will test us again, and we must not rush. Every decision matters." I think we're beginning to understand what she wants us to see." Each rider focused on the terrain, alert to every loose stone, every overhanging rock, every shift in the wind. They had learned to read the land, to anticipate danger before it appeared, and to act with calm precision. Halfway through the canyon, the settlers noticed a small cave set into the cliff wall. It was hidden from view, almost invisible unless someone knew where to look. Thomas signaled to stop, and they dismounted to examine it. The cave offered a brief moment of safety from the blazing sun and a chance to rest the horses. As they gathered near the entrance, the Apache woman appeared silently on a nearby ridge, watching them. She made no gesture, said no word, yet her presence was undeniable. The settlers paused, acknowledging her watchful gaze. Thomas understood the unspoken message. She was giving them space to rest, yet reminding them that they were still being observed, still being tested. Mary sat on a rock, catching her breath. "She doesn't need to speak," she said quietly. "Her presence teaches more than words ever could. We're learning from her without even realizing it sometimes. I feel like every move we make, every choice, is part of a lesson. She's shaping how we think, how we see the land, how we survive." The canyon ahead was steep and rocky, with a series of narrow ledges and sudden drops. Every step required concentration, and every decision had weight. The settlers moved carefully, recalling lessons from previous days. Watch the footing, balance weight on the horses, observe shadows and shapes, anticipate sudden changes. At one point, Samuel's horse stumbled on a loose rock. Thomas was immediately beside him, steadying both horse and rider. "Focus on your balance," Thomas instructed. "Move with the horse, not against it. Stay calm." Each member of the group understood now that courage alone was not enough. Awareness, patience, and quick thinking were equally important. Later in the afternoon, they reached a small plateau with a clear view of the canyon below. The land stretched far and wide, and for the first time, the settlers felt a sense of accomplishment. They had moved safely through treacherous paths, faced challenges, and learned from every moment. But there was still a lesson left to understand, and the Apache woman was ready to reveal it. She appeared briefly on a distant ridge, then moved closer to the group, still silent. This time, there was a calm intensity in her eyes, a quiet authority that demanded attention. Thomas and the others watched her, recognizing that this moment was significant. She had led them through physical challenges, tested their courage, and now she would teach them something deeper. The woman finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "You have learned much. You have moved carefully, observed the land, and survived. But understanding comes not only from actions but from reflection. You must see what is beyond the path before you, beyond the immediate danger. You must see yourselves. It's about understanding what we're capable of, what we can endure, and how we face the unknown. Remember these lessons, for they are the true keys to survival." The canyon was quiet, the wind soft, and the sun low, casting long shadows across the rocks. For the first time, they felt a deep connection to the land, the journey, and the woman who had guided them so carefully. As the day turned to evening, the Apache woman stepped back, her figure blending into the rocks. She left them with a final piece of guidance, spoken with calm authority. "Remember, the land teaches all who walk it. Respect it, learn from it, and act wisely. You are not alone in your abilities, though you walk alone in the desert. Trust in what you have learned and you will survive." The horses were tended, a fire was lit, and a simple meal was shared. There was no chatter, only thoughtful reflection on the lessons of the day. Each had gained more than knowledge. They had gained insight into themselves, into their courage, their fears, and their capacity to act wisely when necessary. Thomas looked around at the group, pride swelling in his chest. "We've grown," he said softly, "not just in skill but in understanding. We see now that survival is not just moving through the land. It's moving through ourselves, through our own limits and fears. We've learned to trust ourselves and each other. That is what she has given us." They understood now that the Apache woman's guidance was not about control or fear. It was about teaching, preparing them to navigate the world with wisdom and courage. Somewhere in the shadows, the woman watched, a silent guardian of the land and a teacher of truths that could not be learned in towns or homes. She had led them through physical and mental challenges, and now she had revealed the deeper lesson. Survival is as much about understanding oneself as it is about understanding the land. The settlers slept under the stars, alert yet confident, knowing that they were stronger, wiser, and more aware than they had been before. They were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, carrying the lessons of the desert and the Apache woman deep within them. As the canyon settled into night, the group dreamed of cliffs, shadows, and the silent figure who had changed their journey forever. They understood that her presence, her guidance, and her lessons would remain with them, shaping their decisions, their courage, and their understanding of the world long after they left the desert behind. The morning light filtered gently over the canyon, casting warm gold across the rugged landscape. The settlers awoke with a quiet determination, a deep awareness that the journey ahead would be the culmination of all they had learned. The Apache woman's lessons had shaped them over the days, lessons of awareness, courage, patience, and respect for the land. Now, as they prepared to move forward, they felt the weight and the gift of what they had gained. Thomas mounted his horse first, scanning the path ahead. The narrow trail wound along cliffs, dipped into hidden valleys, and climbed toward ridges that seemed almost insurmountable. Yet, each step forward was guided by the confidence and skill they had developed under the unseen guidance of the woman who had entered their journey as both observer and teacher. Samuel followed closely, steady in his movements and careful in his attention to every detail of the terrain. He had grown stronger than he had believed possible, no longer merely afraid of the canyon, but alert and capable in every choice he made. Mary rode beside him, her posture strong and her gaze sweeping the cliffs, ever aware of the subtle signs of danger and opportunity. Peter brought up the rear, his calm presence reassuring the group, his experience now matched with renewed vigilance and understanding. The canyon stretched endlessly before them, a reminder of the vastness and challenge of the world they had chosen to navigate. The sun climbed higher, and the wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the dry, earthy scent of the desert. Every sound, every movement, every shadow became part of the lesson they had learned. Awareness and reflection were as crucial as strength and endurance. As the group advanced, they noticed subtle signs of movement, a flicker of shadow, a distant sound carried by the wind. They instinctively scanned the cliffs and ledges, recognizing the presence of the Apache woman before she revealed herself. She appeared on a ridge above, her figure small but commanding, her eyes focused on the settlers below. She said nothing, yet her presence spoke volumes. She was there to witness their progress, to see how fully they had absorbed the lessons she had imparted. Thomas felt a surge of gratitude. "We've come far," he whispered to Mary, "not just in distance but in understanding. We're not the same people who entered this canyon." Awareness, patience, careful action, and understanding ourselves, those are what keep us alive. The lessons of the desert were evident in every choice they made, and the memory of the woman's words guided them constantly. "We are alone. Let's do what is necessary." It was here that the Apache woman finally approached them directly. She did not carry a weapon, nor did she move with haste. Her steps were deliberate, calm, and full of quiet authority. Thomas and the others dismounted, their hearts racing with a mixture of anticipation and respect. The woman's eyes scanned each of them, and for the first time she spoke in a tone that was neither mocking nor commanding, but measured and clear. "You have come far," she said, "not just in distance but in understanding. You have learned the land, you have learned yourselves, and you have learned each other. The canyon tests all who walk it, but it rewards those who see clearly, act wisely, and respect its lessons. We understand now that survival is more than endurance. It is awareness, courage, and understanding. That is the path to true survival. But it also teaches those who listen. Do not forget the lessons of courage, patience, and awareness. And do not forget that you are never truly alone when you understand your own strength and judgment." She had been their teacher, their guide, and their shadow in the canyon, showing them how to survive and grow without ever forcing them to act. The group stayed on the plateau for the night, resting their horses and reflecting on the journey. The stars filled the sky, brilliant and countless, and the desert around them seemed calm yet alive. They shared a quiet meal, speaking little but thinking deeply. Each one understood the profound impact of the woman's guidance. The lessons of awareness, patience, courage, and self-reflection were now part of them. Samuel spoke softly, almost to himself. "I feel different, stronger, not just in body but in mind and heart. We've learned how to see, how to act, and how to survive. I will never forget these lessons. We can face the challenges of the world, whatever comes next, because we have learned to act with thought, courage, and respect. We found understanding of the land, of ourselves, and of the strength that comes from patience, courage, and awareness. That is a gift we will carry forever." Her presence, her lessons, and her quiet authority had left a mark on them that would never fade. The next morning, the group prepared to leave the plateau and continue their journey beyond the canyon. The path ahead was unknown, as vast and challenging as ever, but they felt ready. They had learned the ways of the land, the importance of careful observation, and the power of calm, deliberate action. Most importantly, they had learned to trust themselves and each other. As they moved forward, the settlers looked back one last time at the ridges and cliffs where the Apache woman had appeared. She was gone, but her presence remained, a guiding force in their memories and thoughts. They had faced the wilderness, learned its lessons, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than when they had entered. Years later, the settlers recounted their journey to others. They told stories of the canyon, of the challenges, and of the mysterious woman who had guided them with quiet authority. Her line, whispered in that first encounter, "We are alone, let's do what is necessary," had become a symbol of courage, wisdom, and the strength that comes from understanding oneself and the world. The story of the canyon, the journey, and the Apache woman became part of their legacy. It reminded them, and those who heard it, that survival is more than endurance. It is observation, patience, courage, and the wisdom to act wisely when no one else can guide you. The lessons they had learned in the canyon shaped not just their journey through the land, but their journey through life itself. And somewhere beyond the ridges and valleys, the Apache woman continued to walk, unseen but present, watching the land and the travelers who passed through it. She remained a silent guardian, a teacher of truths that could not be learned in towns or homes, showing that the greatest lessons often come not from words, but from presence, observation, and the challenges we face along the way. The settlers moved on, carrying her lessons in their hearts. They had begun as travelers seeking passage through a canyon, but they left as people transformed, aware of their own strength, courage, and wisdom. They had learned that survival is not just about reaching a destination. It is about understanding the journey, respecting the land, and trusting in the power within themselves to act when necessary. The canyon remained, timeless and vast, filled with secrets, shadows, and challenges. But for the settlers, it was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of growth, of learning, and of transformation. The lessons of the Apache woman, whispered and observed, had become part of them. They knew that no matter where life's paths took them, they would carry the wisdom of the land and the lessons of courage, patience, and awareness forever. And so, the story of the canyon, the settlers, and the mysterious Apache woman became a tale passed down through generations. A true story of challenge, learning, and transformation. A story that reminded all who heard it that even in solitude, guidance can be found, lessons can be learned, and courage can be discovered. The whisper of her words, "We are alone, let's do what is necessary," echoed far beyond the canyon, inspiring those who walked their own paths, teaching that the strength to face life lies within, guided by observation, wisdom, and the courage to act when needed.